Hi again, everyone. From Cedar Rapids, I'm Bob Ask with another part of my story. My life in the context of history. The history that I taught, that I studied, and how I lived during that time with it. In other words, the big world of history and that little portion of my history, how it fits together. Today, in my total project of vignettes of 20, I'm at number 9. Number 9. I've entitled my vignette today 1957-1981, my Jayhawk football career, which includes, as you'll see in a few minutes, what Jeff people call the golden years. I can still remember very vividly the long, quiet bus ride home from Iowa City, mid-season 1960, Jefferson's 4th football year. Quiet because we had just again taken a thumping by the Little Hawks. A quiet bus ride home. Halfway to Cedar Rapids, I shared a question with the new head coach, Ted Lawrence, who was sitting next to me. It turned out to be the most radical and yet profound suggestion ever I or anyone else could maybe have made. The Jayhawk player who was involved in the query, I have long, along with him, laughed about, because it was both the smartest and the dumbest suggestion I could have made. Why? Because I offered him my best lineman to be installed as a quarterback. You see, we were having trouble in that department. So I said to Ted, coming home, why don't we put Dave Long in at quarterback? He was an in for me, and like I said, my best lineman. We laughed because dumb, I was giving up my best player. Smart, because it was really going to help the Jayhawk team. Well, how did it all turn out? The rest of history. That Saturday morning, we installed Dave at quarterback down on the practice field. He looked promising. That next Monday night, just by chance, we had a JV game again at Iowa City, and we put him in there, and he made a good impression. We finished that 1960 season 1-1-1 the last 3 games. 1-1, lost 1, tied 1. And it showed that maybe we were on the right track. Apparently, everyone else thought so too, because when the next season rolled around, we were already ranked in the top 10 after a losing campaign the year prior. And sure enough, in 1961, with Dave at quarterback, we finished 7-2 and were ranked number 2 in the state of Iowa in the final polls. Dave by the way, became first team All-City, first team All-Mississippi Valley Conference, and first team All-State, and even made one All-America selection. So Dave and I laugh now because we correspond. He lives in Arizona, and he keeps track of his old coach who made that suggestion. So the Jayhawks, not knowing quite yet what to expect, were soon going to see we had entered the golden years. Was I dumb or was I smart? I think you can tell. Cedar Rapids Jefferson High School, majestically located high on a hill, became the pride of Cedar Rapids West Side that school year of 1957-58. At the age of 31, you can imagine how proud I was, what a thrill it was for Marilyn and me to be a part of that beautiful new school up on the hill. The school year 57-58. By the way, when spring rolled around, Jerry came along and we entered our new house, so you can see how busy we were. My twofold career profession and goal, which I had way back in the 1930s, began, as we noted earlier, being a coach and a history teacher. We're now going to be a part of that new West High Cedar Rapids School, Thomas Jefferson, the Jayhawks. And I was going to be, as fate turned out, a football coach for 25 years with that Cedar Rapids Jefferson team. Jeff's varsity staff there at the very beginning was only 3 men. Nowadays, you see your big schools with a staff of 7, 8, or 9 assistant coaches. We had to take up the new Wilson and the new Roosevelt players who now merged into the new Jefferson. There were just 3 of us. The first Jayhawk coach was George Heidinger, who had been the head coach at Roosevelt. The new backfield coach coming from Wilson was Vern Bredesen, and the new line coach was Bob Ask, who came from McKinley. So this was our first staff. By the way, as it turned out, many years later, Vern and I coached 25 years and never missed a game, 229, when 1981 rolled around, our last year on the staff. Today, I want to just briefly share our record, the history, some stats of interest, and just share a little bit of our 2 greatest games in Jefferson's history. The game of 1965 and the game of 1972, both with championship written all over for the winner. You'll quickly see, as I get into those games and the stats, how fortunate it was for me. I always considered myself to be in the right place at the right time because we had the horses. Oh, you have to coach, of course, but you have to have the men capable of carrying out the coaching. And we certainly had our share. We became real soon one of the top teams in the state of Iowa. And on a few occasions, we were absolutely number one. The Jayhawks, in my 25 years, won 3 state championships, 64, 5, and 72. We had 3 runner-up positions in the state back in the mythical days of rankings. We had 2 third-place finishes and 1 fourth. Why, in a 12-year span that we call the golden years, 1961 to 72, we were 95 and 13 with 3 ties. Included in that long stretch of success was an undefeated string of 37 games. We had 21 straight winning seasons after taking our lumps there at the very beginning, and we won 8 Mississippi Valley Conference championships in my time there. How fortunate I was. My final game in 1981 was a 27-0 victory over City High down there. And by the way, we all know how good City High teams are. We beat City High 21 straight seasons. That's always quite an accomplishment. Now, for my 2 greatest games. In 1965, after being mythical champs the year before, 64 as well, we were trying to repeat. 2 unbeaten teams collided at Kingston on that night, November 5, 1965. The Blue Devils from Davenport Central and the Cedar Rapids Jefferson Jayhawks. It was for all the marbles. It was called in the newspapers the Dream Game. Why, it was televised, and that was sort of a beginning for that sort of thing. Some smaller schools didn't even have their game that night because of all the ballyhoo that was there on the turf at Kingston. Davenport Central, Cedar Rapids Jefferson on that great night. We came from behind in the 4th quarter after trailing and won that game 20-18. We came down the field, John Muskimmin running here, Larry Lawrence running there, a pass to Scoop Hellenthal, critical. And we came down and Larry Lawrence put it in. Strange it is to say, notice the score 20-18. It all depended, as it turned out, on conversion attempts. We made 2 of our 3, and the great Davenport team missed all 3 extra points. That is a shocking statistic. Now, technically, we had to win the following week because that was not the final game of the season. But we had no trouble with Rock Island, our final game, beating them 43-0. So we were 64 and now 65 state champions. Some of our players as sophomores, juniors, and seniors never lost a game at Jefferson. A few years later, in 1972, now in the first year of the playoffs, we had a 9-0 regular season, a great team in 72, but we barely got out of our ninth game of the regular season. We were down at Muscatine, just an average team, and we had to scrape and scrape to come out of there with a close victory in order to go into the 4-team playoffs. One of our players, Pat Casey, recovered, can you imagine, 4 fumbles at Muscatine, 2 that set up touchdowns, 4 fumble recoveries, and we got out of Muscatine just luckily to go 9-0, and had only given up 5 touchdowns all year long. But we made the playoffs. We knocked off Cedar Falls at Kingston in the first game. Dowling of Des Moines knocked out Sioux City East. So now it was going to be Des Moines Dowling and Jefferson. The game was originally scheduled to be played at Drake, but because of field conditions, was moved to Kinnick Stadium in Iowa City. I can remember as a coach how we felt. We were honestly just so glad to be there to play Dowling. They had only lost 1 game in their last 53 games. So we knew how good they were. How did that game go? Early in the game, we got the ball, marched up 1/3 of the way, and had to punt. A Dowling receiver fumbled the ball inside the 10-yard line, and we fell on the ball, I think on the 6th-yard line. One of our good backs, Jim Doolin, ran it in for the touchdown. We missed the extra point, and we were ahead 6-0 early. That was the only score of the game. We held them, they held us. And fortunately, our quarterback and our team responded by working out the clock there late in the game. And here we were, the first 4A state champions in the first playoffs ever. Well, we finished 11-0, having still given up only 5 touchdowns in that great season, 72. In closing, this is about that lineman that converted from end to our quarterback much earlier, Dave Long, my friend. Dave, as an Iowa Hawkeye, was 3-time a starter at Iowa, playing on defense, 2 times an All-Big Ten player, an All-American again at both high school and now at college. A very great player who went on to 7 years in the pros, playing for St. Louis and New Orleans, and he was on the line when Dempsey kicked that memorable field goal, I guess it was, in the pro ranks. In our new book that we're going to share on a vignette later on, that my friend and I, he was the author, I was his helper, came up with, Dave Long has been named by my friend and me as the greatest Jayhawk player in the 63 years up to now. More on that later. You won't want to miss my next vignette, especially you baseball fans, because we're going to talk baseball. See you then.